what's up? Andrew Kramer here for VideoCopilot.net, and welcome back to another very exciting tutorial. Today, we're going to be taking a look at creating this destructive crossfire effect inside of After Effects without any third-party plugins. So let's go and take a look at what we're going to be creating. Now, what makes this effect really cool is that it's entirely procedural. So I can rotate the direction of this blast and all of the effects will update. So things like the particles, the direction of the force, and even the way that the pieces chip off of the title. So there's a lot of different ways that you can use these techniques. So I would recommend you guys watch all the way through. Lots of great tips and tricks throughout. You won't regret it. Unlike all of those other tutorials of mine, even I regret them. Now, before we dive deeper into the tutorial, I do have some exciting news to share. As many of you know, Video Copilot has always been about sharing tips and techniques with the community. So for the past several months, we've been working on an idea to create an event where we can do this face-to-face. And of course, we made a trailer. So here's a video about our mini tour, and hopefully this is just the beginning. Hey, what's up guys? Andrew Kramer here for VideoCopilot.net, and we've got some very exciting news. We are coming to Europe and we're bringing our new show, Video Copilot Live. It's a 4-city tour. We're going to London, we're going to Paris, we're going to Barcelona, and we're going to Berlin. It's gonna be crazy. And the crazy part is it is only weeks away. And this is actually my first time ever visiting Europe. So even if the show doesn't work out, it's gonna be a lot of fun. The show is a full day of presentations from top designers that are going to be showing you practical tips and tricks and real useful advice for all of you designers out there. And of course, I'll be doing a presentation, and hopefully we'll have some fun surprises as well. We've got some amazing venues across Europe. We're going to have an after party. It's going to be a great time. You might say we spared no expense. Well, I can't say that, but definitely no dinosaurs. I can't say that either. We're partnering with our friends at the Motion Designers community. We're really excited about this show. Tickets are available now, so if you're in Europe, come hang out with us and we'll see you at the show. I think this might be too much light, but I could be wrong. So if you're anywhere near Europe in the next few weeks, it's going to be a lot of fun, and it'd be great to have you. Of course, I'll be recording my presentations, posted online, and if you have an idea on maybe where we should take the show next, just let us know. Anyways, lots of exciting things this year, but for now, let's go ahead and get started. First, we're going to create some nice looking text. Then we're going to create a matte that looks something like this, and that's going to be used to create the hole, the rough edges on the text, and even the direction of the effect. All right, first thing we're going to do is create a new composition. We'll set this to 1920 by 812. 5 seconds, and we'll call this Crossfire. Crossfire, and then hit OK. Then we'll take the text tool, we'll click in here, we'll type the number 5. I'm using this font called Astrolab, which is just a nice bold font. Then we'll go ahead, scale this up, center it, and then we're going to pre-compose it. So we'll choose Layer, Pre-compose, call this Text Edit. And this way we can change the text to anything we want later on. So we'll hit OK. And now we want to add a little bit of a 3-dimensional look. So to do that, we need to create a bevel profile. So we'll choose Layer Style, Inner Glow, and we'll go down to the settings. We'll set the blend mode to normal, set the color to black, set the technique to precise, and the size to about 6. Now to use it as a bump map, we need to pre-compose it. So we'll choose Layer, Pre-compose. We'll call this Bevel Profile, move all attributes, and hit OK. Then we'll create a new solid, and we're going to make it 50% gray, hit OK. We'll call this Glass. Now to create our bump effect, we're going to use the CC glass effect. So we'll type glass into the effects here, grab CC glass, drop it on our solid. Then we're going to go over to the surface option and we're going to set the bevel profile as our bump map. And now we can start seeing some depth. Let's set the softness down to 0 and the displacement down to 0. And that way we have a nice sharp bevel. Now, in order to get our transparency back, let's put the glass layer below the bevel profile. And then we'll set the track matte to alpha matte. You can toggle the switches here. Now to add some 3D lighting, let's set the light setting to AE lights. And then we can create some After Effects lights. Set them to 0.100, hit OK. Let's make sure the lights are on top. And then we can move it over, maybe push it back in Z space. And hit T and turn the intensity up. So that looks pretty good. Then we'll hit Control D, duplicate, and put another light down here. Maybe turn the brightness down just a bit. All right, so that looks pretty good, but we want to add some more dimension to our bevel profile. So let's lock our Crossfire comp and double click on the bevel profile, slide it over here side by side, and now we're going to make some changes to the bevel profile. So first thing we'll do is create a new solid, call this hexagon, hit OK. And then we're going to add the effect CC Hex Tile, drop that onto our solid. Now let's invert the alpha. So we'll take the invert effect, drop that on, set the channel to the alpha channel. And so now we have a nice pattern. There's also a cool transparency switch. If you click that, it'll use the transparency from the layers below. Now let's set the radius to maybe 10 and hit T. We'll lower the opacity down, maybe about 5%. And maybe even set the radius to 6. All right, so that looks pretty good. But another thing I want to do is adjust the bevel profile. Now to do that, I can go into the inner glow settings. And instead of using a color, let's use a gradient. Now I'm going to invert the dark and light color. Now let's move the white color about here. And then we'll put another point with gray at about 67% is good. Then hit OK. Then we'll set this to gradient. And we can even change the size and we'll affect the bevel. So play around with that. Now let's go ahead and add some actual texture. So we'll go to the footage here. We'll close this and then we'll take the cement texture and drop it into our bevel profile. And what I want to do is go over here, add the curves adjustment, and we'll set this to multiply and turn on our transparency switch. Now it's pretty noisy. So what I like to do with texture is just flatten it out and then just add a little bit of texture. And here I can turn off the hexagon just for a second so we can see this. Cool. So this way it's not so noisy. There's some flat parts and just has a little bit of variance. Then I'll hit T and we'll set the opacity down to about 20%. And then we'll turn the hexagon back on and maybe we'll even turn this down about 3%. So that looks pretty good. We'll close our bevel profile. We'll jump back over to our main comp and we'll drop the cement texture into the comp with our lights. Turn on the transparency switch. We'll set this to say overlay and let's get rid of the color by using a tint effect. Drop that on there. And that looks pretty good. We could hit T and just drop the intensity down. We just want to add a little bit of variation. Now the other thing we can do is adjust our lights as well. Backlight that a bit more. All right, now we can pre-compose everything. Control A, and we'll choose Layer, Pre-compose, and we'll call this Title Look, and hit OK. And then we'll take a copy, hit Control D to duplicate, and we just want to add a little bit of depth. So we'll type in Radial Blur, and drop that onto the bottom copy. And what we want to do is set it to fading zoom, and turn the amount down to about negative, 22. And then we'll add a curves adjustment. We can look at the transparency here and we'll go to the alpha channel and we're just going to crank it up and then go to the RGB and drop it down. So it's just kind of a dark background. So just a little bit of fake depth here for our title. And then we'll do one more pre-compose, hold down shift, choose layer, pre-compose. We'll just call this type and hit OK. All right, so this is looking pretty good. Now, most tutorials would probably just stop right here, but we're not wasting your time. We're giving you the good stuff. right after these messages.
The ultimate challenge. Crossfire! You get caught up in the crossfire!
And we're back. Now it's time to create some destruction. And this is a very important step because it drives all of the other effects that we're going to be creating later. So let's create a new solid, and we'll keep the width the same, but we're going to set the height to 50. And we're going to call this slice. Then we're going to hit OK. And what I want to do is pre-compose it right away. So layer, pre-compose, and we're going to leave all the attributes and hit OK. And that way the comp stays the same size as the layer. So we'll double click, and I'm going to add a rectangle mask just by double clicking on it, and it makes it the same size as the layer. Then I'm going to hit M, go down to the expansion and just turn it down, maybe -6. Then we're going to add the effect roughen edges. So we'll take roughen edges, drop it on there, and let's set the border to about 13 or 14, and then turn the scale up a bit. And then we're going to do one thing that's kind of strange is we're going to pre-compose it. And we're going to move all the attributes, and we're going to call this slice roughen and hit OK. So now we'll jump back to our crossfire layer, and then let's set the slice layer to yellow so it's easier to see, and we'll turn it off. And then we'll select our type layer, and then we're going to add an effect called set matte. Now I should point out that we have a plugin called FX Console that allows you to search through effects a lot faster. And it works kind of like this. You select a layer, you hit Control Space, you get a search bar, and you can just type in an effect, say set, and then hit enter. And so it's just very easy to add effects without having to go through and drag and drop. So you can keep using this, but I would recommend downloading the free plugin from videocopilot.net FX Console. So we will take the set matte effect, drop it onto our type. We're going to select our slice layer, and we can turn off stretch matte. Now we can invert this and we kind of have the idea, but here's the problem. If I take our slice layer, hit R, and I rotate it, the effect doesn't update. So what I want to do is turn on the collapse transformation switch. And now if I rotate the layer, it will update in the set matte effect. Now this is an important step because our entire system is going to work around this one slice layer. Now, before we go on, let's just create a background. So we'll create a new solid. We'll call this background, set this to 812, hit OK. Then we're going to add the ramp effect. So gradient ramp. And of course, you can search it in the effects presets. We're going to set this to radial, swap the colors, and just make this just a nice wide gradient, and we'll put it down into the bottom. All right, so next we're going to create our burned edge. Now the key to procedural is continuously reusing the same assets. So we're going to click on the type layer, and we're going to choose edit, duplicate. We'll take the bottom copy, and we'll call this burned edge. And then we'll solo the layer, and we're going to add a fast blur, fast box blur. And we'll set this to 6 and iteration to 1. And then we'll add a curves adjustment. And we'll go to the alpha channel, and we're going to crank this up. And basically what we're doing is eroding the edge so that it's a little bit larger than our cut. All right, so we want to get rid of some of the extra overflow on the sides. So we're going to add another set matte effect. And we don't even have to do anything, just turn it on. And then add one more set matte effect. And we're going to set it to the slice layer. And now we have a perfect burned edge. So we can turn that back on, and you can see the difference here. Now, the other thing I'm going to do is add a fractal noise on top of it. So we'll choose Fractal Noise, hit enter, and we'll set the brightness to about 20. And we'll go down to the transform, and we'll turn this down. And the idea is that we're trying to create like an ember looking effect. So that's pretty good for now. And then we're going to add a color correction tint effect. And we're going to set the color to say orange, then hit OK. All right, so next we're going to add some broken edges around the burn marks. So for that, we're going to be using this texture, rocky edge. We're going to drop this into our project. Now we only want it to show up around the letters. So we're going to take a copy of our type, choose edit, duplicate. We're going to put it above the rocky edge and choose Alpha Matte. And so now if we take the rocky edge and move it around, it stays inside of the shape of our letters. Now, one thing we're going to do is click on the type, go to the effects, and delete the Set Matte effect, because we don't mind if the rocky edges goes a little bit past the burn mark. And in fact, we do want it to overlap a little bit so it feels a bit more random. Now, let's go and duplicate it for the bottom. We'll choose Edit, Duplicate. We'll take the rocky layer here, and we're going to take the rotation tool and just rotate it, hold Shift, and then move it down. Now we want the broken edges to stay with the slice, so we'll take both copies, hold Control this time, select both, and then we're going to parent the slice layer. Now, just for reference, if I hit R and I rotate this, all of our effects are moving together. So we'll set that back down to 0. All right, so now we're going to add a laser blast, and we're going to be using another free plugin from Video Copilot called Saber. Now, you can check it out in the description, link to download. We're going to create a new solid. We'll call this Saber. Hit OK. And we'll come over here, we'll type Saber, drop that on our solid, and we get this really nice looking laser blast. But I do want to change the size of the layer a little bit smaller so it renders even faster. So we'll set the width to 124 by, say, 600. And we're going to put it straight across just like that. Set the transfer mode to screen, and we'll put it on top. And we can play around with the different presets here. Not sure. That looks pretty good. Now maybe I'll take the end size and scale it down, and maybe turn the brightness up. Now I'm actually going to take the layer and stretch it out a bit, and then we're going to animate it. So hit P, bring up the position, and we're going to move it off frame, go forward about, I don't know, 7 or 8 frames, slide it past. And now we have to decide, where do we want this impact to be? Now let's go ahead, just to make it easy, we'll set the impact at 1 second. So we'll slide this forward, and we want it to be covering most of the effect. So let's try, how about like that? That's pretty good. So we can trim this now, Alt, end bracket, and now we have our laser blast. Another quick thing, if we go to about here, I'm going to duplicate this, edit, duplicate. We just want to create a flash. So we'll hit P and turn off the keyframes, and actually we'll right click and choose transform reset. And what I'll do is solo this, and let's move the position to about a point, and then set it to default, maybe turn up the intensity. That's pretty good. And then we'll hit S and scale it up. So we just want a nice flash of light. Maybe even go to the render settings, turn the gamma down, just so it's a nice flash. And we're going to set it to be 1 frame long. Nice. Now, the other thing to consider is that we need the effect to turn on at a certain point. So what we could do is just take the rocky edge and move it over so that it starts just as the impact happens. Now, we could also do the same thing to the slice layer itself. So if we open it up, we can trim this down so that it's off and then on. And so now if we look at this, we're starting to get the basic idea. Now, the other thing that's important is let's take the saber and the hotspot and parent it to our slice layer. And what's cool about that is that I can actually hit the R, rotate this, and you can start to see how this is all going to work together. Now, speaking of working together, we want to sync the color to the saber and to the burned edge. And in order to do that, we need to set up a simple expression. So let's return the rotation back to 0. And on our slice layer, what I'm going to do is choose Effect, Expression Control, Color Control. And we'll just change this to color, and we'll set the color of this to sort of that orange color. Now, what we want to do is link all of the different instances of color to this one color control. Now, a quick way to do that is that we can lock the setting up here and then go down into the different places. So we have it on the burned edges. So if we open that up, we have the tint effect that's on the burned edges. And if we alt click on the color, we can pick whip the control for the color at the top and then just click away. And then we can close that. Now we also want to link the saber color. So we can hit E, open up saber, color, alt click, take the pick whip, drag it up to the color, click away. And we'll also do it to the flash color as well. So we'll hit E, open up saber, alt click on the color, pick whip to the color. So now if we change this color, we change it everywhere. And we've got rotation. So we are well on our way. Now, before we add some particles, let's see if we can melt the edge of the letter a little bit. So here's what we'll do. First, we'll unlock the effects and control there. And what I want to do is open up the Bevel Profile comp. So we'll hit backslash and slide this over to the side here. Now, to create the burned edge, we're going to create a new solid. And we'll make it 1920 by 256. We'll call this burn. Hit OK. Then we'll add the Fractal Noise effect, drop it onto the solid, set it to dynamic invert, and we'll set the transfer mode to darken. And then we're going to take the rectangle tool and we just want to create a nice thin cutout. Hit F or bring up the feather properties and just soften it. Then we're going to turn on the transparency switch there. And so now you can start to see that we're affecting the bump map. Now let's bring this edge in a bit so we don't get this hard cut off. Then we'll go to the transform and size down the scale of the fractal and maybe bring the contrast down and the brightness up. So now we have this kind of nice effect. Now we do want it to rotate with our slice, but we don't want to have to do it manually. We want it to be procedural. We want it to be all connected. So here's what we'll do. We'll set the rotation back to 0. So we need to set up an expression link. Now we can link between comps. What we're going to do is move this bevel down to the bottom here. And then we're going to go to our main Crossfire comp. And then we're going to scroll down to the slice layer and expand the transform. And now we can see the position and the rotation. Then we're going to take our burn layer, hit P, then hold Shift, hit R, and take the position and the rotation. And we're going to alt click the position. And we're going to pick whip the position. Then we're going to alt click the rotation. And we're going to pick whip the rotation. And we click away. We can just put this right back where it was. Now, if we click on the burn layer again, we can make a few changes here. One thing I want to do is change the blending mode to none. And that'll just make it a little bit tighter around the edge. And then we just play around, just kind of see what we like. Could hit F and maybe change the amount of feathering and even sort of move this around a bit. But what's nice is that we get a really realistic three-dimensional bump effect. We can even lower the opacity, which will just blend it in a little bit more. And the other thing to keep in mind is that this is the bevel profile. So we can change things like turn the hexagon effect off, and now we have a more concrete looking text. So there's a lot of things that you can do just by changing the bump map layer. Now we also want to turn this effect on at the right time. So we'll truncate the beginning of this, and that way it's off and then it's on. All right, let me close this and we'll jump back into our main comp. Now let's move on to creating some particle effects. So what we're going to do is set the rotation back to 0, and we're going to take our type layer that just has the cutout, and we're going to duplicate it. Edit, duplicate. We're going to hit return and call this particle effects. Now we only want the particles to come out of the cutout. So we're going to turn off invert, and now we have a selection of just that part. And then if we select this layer, we can add the effect called pixel poly. Now, if we drop the pixel poly effect on our particle layer and turn off the set matte, we can actually see what this does. It sort of smashes the pieces, sort of shatters them. Now, what we want to do is move the start time over to our impact point. So if we hold Control and move this, we can move it kind of slow. And I think right about there, we could turn the set matte back on, set the grid spacing down to about 12, and that'll just make smaller pieces. And then we can do things like play around with the randomness and the force amount. And this is a really good start to our particle effects. And let's actually move this up above below the saber layers. All right, so we've got some basic destruction, but we want to link it together with all of the rest of the effects. So let's start out by setting the label color to pink so it's a little bit easier to see the particle layers. And we'll go over here to the pixel poly effect, and we notice that we have a force center. So we don't have a direction, we only have a location of the force. So in this case, the force that's blowing these particles is in the middle. So if I move it around, the particles shoot that way. If I move it down below, the particles shoot up. So what we need to do is connect it to the location where the laser is coming from. So over to the side. All right, so this looks like it's going in the right direction. But how can we link the position to the rotation of our slice effect? Well, here's a cool solution. If we click on our slice layer, we can add another expression controller for a point control. Now we're going to move that point close to where it was a second ago, off to the left. And then we'll lock the effects control and then go into the particle effects, hit E, go down to the pixel poly, and for the force center, we're going to alt click and pick whip the point control. So this is almost the solution. So let's go to about here. If I rotate the slice layer, something is happening with our particles and they're no longer staying in sync. And the reason why is that the point is not updating based on the rotation. So in order to get the point to update based on the rotation, here's how you fix that. Now, first unlock this, and then we'll go to our slice layer. And for our point control, we're going to add an expression. So we're going to alt click on the stopwatch and we're going to type to world parentheses value parentheses. Now the point has jumped down here. So what we're going to do is just move it back up. So maybe right here. And so now if we rotate the slice, the direction of the force stays in line. All right, so now we have that expression set up. We can start working on the look of these particles. Now, one thing I want to do is add a little bit more randomness so it doesn't just look like triangles. Now, to do that, we'll create a new solid, make it comp size, and we're going to call it holes, and hit OK. Then we're going to take the Fractal Noise effect and drop that onto our layer. Now, what we're going to do is set the scale down and turn the contrast up really high, maybe the complexity down to about 3. And then we'll go ahead and pre-compose this layer, pre-compose. We're going to move all attributes. We're going to call this holes map and hit OK. Now we'll move this to the bottom and turn it off. Then we'll select our particle effects layer and we're going to add a set matte effect. So type set matte, drop that on here. We're going to choose the holes map and we're going to set it to luminance. Now if we move it up before the pixel poly effect and slide over solo, you can actually see now we've created little holes in this effect, and we can invert it to create a slightly different look. But basically, we created some sort of rougher looking pieces. All right, so this is looking a lot better. What we could do is rotate the slice one more time just so that we can work on these particles. And let's play around with the particle settings. So let's turn up the speed randomness to 100. Now we can increase the direction randomness, which makes it kind of shoot in all different directions. Now, if we want to add density, what we can do is duplicate the particle layer, Control D, and then just make some changes. So maybe we'll set this to 15, and we could turn the force up, or we could turn it down. This is a really cool effect where you have some particles that linger after the destruction, and sometimes it's cool if they're pretty small. You can even have them even slower than that. Check that out. You can play around with this invert setting. It just creates a slightly different look based on the noise. But that's really nice. And there is a spinning, but you want to be careful with that. It can start looking a little bit weird. Now, we could also turn the gravity on to say 0.1 and 0.1. And we could probably set up an expression controller for this as well, but there's just a couple of these. Now, another thing we'll do is duplicate this again, Control D. And now we want to create more like spark layers. Now, to do that, we're going to use a color tint effect. So we'll choose Effect, Color Correction, Tint, and we're going to link this color to our control color. So let's lock that, jump into our particle effect, hit E, open up the tint, and we're going to map the colors to that. We'll just map them both. There we go. And we'll rename this to particle sparks. And I'll set the label color to blue. Now let's change the settings. We'll unlock and change the settings. Maybe slow the force down a bit. And we'll turn the spinning down and the grid spacing. So that's pretty cool. Now I want to reduce the amount of particles. So it's kind of an interesting way to do that. I use this checkerboard effect and I put it before all of my layers. And I just played around with the width and set this to stencil alpha. So now we can see some empty patches if we turn this on and off. So just a nice randomness. All right, so let's keep moving on. What I'm gonna do is duplicate this particle effect, and we're gonna just change the settings again. So maybe increase the speed, turn the randomness down, just kind of create a nice straight line effect. Now, another thing that we need to account for is the explosiveness of this effect. So what we should probably be thinking about is how we can make the time start a little bit sooner. So if we hold Control and shift it just a bit, we can make it seem like the effect is starting more explosively because it happens really quickly. Now, what I'm going to do is take all of our particle layers and shrink them down to the 1 second mark so they turn on sort of instantaneously. Now, same thing with our other particle effects. Let's make it seem like they start a bit sooner. It's pretty good. Now we need something to be a bit faster. Yeah, that's looking good. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that we can put some of the layers behind the title and behind the burn marks. And it just creates more depth. And sometimes you need things to be more visible. And so you can put all of the effects behind, and that way your title stays more readable. So for now, we'll just leave them all on top. Now again, we can rotate the effect and it still works nicely. Now, if you want to add motion blur and you don't care about render times, we can create a new adjustment layer. And we'll call this Force Motion Blur. And we can find the effect called Force Motion Blur, put that on top, and we actually get some pretty good looking motion blur. Cool thing is you can just turn it off while you're working. Now, the other cool thing is that I have included in this project file a free clip from our Action Essentials collection. This is a very strange clip that I find myself using quite often, and it's basically a particle stream that dissipates. Now, what we're going to do is drop this in above the Force Motion Blur, slide it over, and we're going to scale it up. Hit S, scale it up, rotate it. We just want to sync it up there. Hit S. And now we have a nice smoky effect. Now to make it a little bit more dense, we'll add a curves adjustment and just boost the alpha channel a little bit. It's pretty good. And then we could duplicate the layer, scale it down. Maybe we flip it just for a little randomness and hit T and lower the opacity. And we can even put this below the title as well, just so we have smoke on both sides. So there we go. Let's try that. Bring the opacity down. We don't want it to be too strong. All right, so now let's add some color correction and some nice glow effects. All right, so to add some glow effects, we're gonna create a new adjustment layer and we'll put it above the motion blur. We'll call this glow. And what we're gonna do is choose channel, shift channels. And this is a cool technique that I like to use for colored glow. And we're going to set the alpha to saturation. And then we're going to do another effect called solid composite. And we'll set that to black. Basically, this allows us to select the colored particles. And now we can add the normal glow effect, stylize glow. And let's see, we'll turn, and then we'll duplicate it. Control D, and then turn up the size a bit. And then duplicate it again. And that's good. And then we'll set the transfer mode of the adjustment layer to, say, screen, and then we get a nice glow. Now, I'm also going to add a hue and saturation effect. And just to make it a little bit brighter, we'll go to the cyan color and just turn up the lightness. And then maybe on our slice control, let's set this to like a darker blue. That's pretty good. Now to make the glow even a little bit more bright, we're going to add a curves adjustment. Just boost it up a bit. All right, so that's looking pretty good. And now we can add some overall color correction. So we'll go to the top, create a new adjustment layer. We'll hit return, hit CC. We'll go over here and we'll type curves. Maybe add a tint effect. And how about a noise effect? All right, so what we'll do is set the tint down to about 20%. We're going to add some curve contrast. And just add a little bit of noise. I like to do about like 4 or 5. All right, so this is looking pretty good. And of course, we want to make sure that the particle effects are parented to our slice layer. And that way, when we rotate, everything will stay in sync. All right, let's go ahead and move our slice layer up to the top here. And of course, we can change the colors, and just keep in mind that when you play around with the color, you also want to adjust the glow settings. So very cool. Now, one more quick thing that we can do is add some camera shake. So a quick way to do that is with an adjustment layer below the color correction. We'll just call this shake, and we're going to add an expression control slider. We'll just hit return. We'll call this shake. And then we're going to add an effect called transform. And basically what we want to do is take the position, add a wiggle expression. So we alt click on the position. We're going to type wiggle, maybe like 7.5, comma, pick whip the slider. And then at the very end, one more parentheses. So now if we animate the shake value, so we'll set a keyframe, hit U, move forward, and maybe we set it to like 50. Move this over a bit. Let's try that. And maybe have it go down to 0. And just to get the edge fixed, we could do a motion tile effect and place it before everything. Turn on mirror edges and set the output to about 125 and 125. And that sort of repeats the edge, but it should work pretty good. You can also scale it up a little bit. So let's take a look. All right, so maybe we'll just slow this down a bit. We can maybe edit the curve value and just fade it down a bit. And I think the motion blur works with the transform. So if you turn it on for the layer, then you get a little bit of camera motion blur. Now we can take this effect even further and add some bent, broken edges on the outside of the text. And the way to do that would be taking the slice comp, choosing edit, copy, and then jump into the text layer and choose edit, paste. Now we want to link it back up with the main comp. So we can take the expressions that we made earlier, hit EE, hold down Shift, select the position and rotation, choose edit, copy, expression only. Then jump back to the text layer, choose edit, paste, and then we'll move it down to the bottom. And then we're going to duplicate our title. So we'll choose edit, duplicate. And then what we're going to do is turn the slice layer on, set the track matte to alpha matte. And if we look at that with the solo button, we can see that we just made a cutout. Then let's make an adjustment layer, put it below the main title, select it, and we're going to choose turbulent displace, and we'll drop that on there. And then we'll turn the size down a bit and turn the amount up. Then if we unsolo the layer, you can see that it's actually protruding a bit. Now we can turn up the complexity maybe to 2. The other thing we can do is change the color of the slice. So we'll choose color correction tint, and we'll set both colors to white. Now if we jump back into our main comp, you can see we added a really nice detail. Now, if we want to create something a little bit more similar to the shredded example, where it's not just a straight line, so if we select the rough and edges and turn the border amount up, we can actually just start creating a more general destruction pattern. All right, so we've used a lot of different techniques here today, and that is really the secret, is blending together different ideas to create new things, and there's really infinite possibilities. Sometimes I get questions like, Andrew, are you ever going to run out of tutorials? And the answer is probably. All right, so lots of cool techniques in this tutorial. I had a blast working on it. Hope you guys enjoyed it. And as always, please visit the website, videocopilot.net. Always great to be here. I'm Andrew Kramer, and we will see you next time.